Hello everyone and welcome to the reunion and our weekly gardening session where we till the soil so that and pull the weeds out so that our seeds can sprout and flower. There was Motown great Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, a track that was created in the crucible of a sort of, I suppose, a time that has echoed in the time we find ourselves in now. And in terms of what's going on, I mean, it's really a pertinent question in this time. As you all know, Reunion and even the RiseUP program that we had was all built out of that, or grew out of that question of what the fuck do we do now? And in order to do that, in order to answer that question and have agency with that question, we need to orient ourselves and determine what is going on. And we covered off the ideas of information ecology and the different narratives that are out there during the RiseUP, during the soil session of RiseUP. And it's almost with these kind of rolling crises, it's just becoming more and more obvious just how important it is for us to be able to make sense of what is going on and to find truth in this fog of narrative warfare that we find going on out there amidst these cascading crises. And in particular in Australia, our media environment is actually seems to be getting worse and worse by the day. As we've all seen in the last 24 hours, that the government has defunded the ABC even further. Most recently, we've had Channel 9 take over Fairfax. So we've got a further sort of corporatization and consolidation of the messages that we're hearing. Social media isn't much consolation to us. It's rife with misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, bots and troll farms. So it's becoming increasingly important for us to find ways to find the signal in the noise, to help each other find the signal in the noise, and to discern what is really going on so that we can act together and have agency in this time. So on that point, before I do move on, that was, I suppose, an acknowledgement of context, but I'd like to acknowledge the country that I'm on, which is Bundjalung country, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And also like to just take this opportunity for all of us to really sort of take some time and pause and listen to what the country wants from us, to listen to our Indigenous community in terms of what is needed in a time like this. And in fact, one of the guests, Phoebe, who I'll introduce shortly, I actually connected on Twitter. Felipe has introduced us, but a week before, Phoebe and I actually connected over a tweet where Phoebe was saying we do need to have some humility and step back and listen to what these cultures that have been around for thousands, or in our case, tens of thousands of years, and with some humility, listen to them and let them show us the way forward. As you know, as we've been really exploring, in particular with Tyson Yunkaporta. But as far as today is concerned, I'm really excited about this chat with two legends in this space that are really going to help us understand what we can do to make sense of this moment and understand the narratives that are floating around and the outcomes that they're aiming for. Felipe is a friend of Reunion. Hey, Felipe. We met him out here up in Byron when he was out here. He's an activist, strategist with Culture Hack Labs, and has been working in this sort of narrative space for quite some time. And Felipe has kindly introduced us to Phoebe, another renegade scientist, along with Sarah, but also a serial entrepreneur and systems designer and complexity thinker who's been doing work with some of the people who we really know and respect, such as Daniel Schmachtenberger and Nora Bateson. They're just brief intros, but I think you'll both be sort of covering some of the work you've been doing together, so you'll get a better idea of who they are. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Phoebe and Felipe to take us through the next part of the session.
Well, I thought I should start by just saying hello firstly, and massive thank you. I'm very, very glad to be here, and it's really fun to start the day in a different time zone, and with aligned friends and community. And that was a very kind introduction. Thank you, Matt, and thanks Felipe for inviting me here.
Yeah, and as Matt was saying, we've been talking a lot about this very repeated concept of narratives, and it's so difficult to really make sense of what's going on because there's so much, right? And we are constantly flooded with information and news. And then I think recently, Matt, you were showing there's a massive spectrum of media outlets, left, center, right, and so the news are very charged. They have already a very strong narrative inbuilt in them. So it's really difficult to understand because they are very contradictory, right? And then we talk a lot about the hegemonic narrative. So there is a big kind of media landscape, but there are very, very strong dominating narratives that in a way override all other narratives. And maybe, I don't know if you want to add something, and then maybe we can play the video, Phoebe.
Yeah, sounds good. I would just add, like, I've been thinking a lot about this area of narratives, especially the last 3 to 6 months in a more, like, it's been interesting because Felipe and I actually were connected through a place called Schumacher College. So that's kind of our origin story, I guess, which is a radical sustainability, deep ecology-based college here in the UK in Devon. And I would say Schumacher and a lot of the thinkers and teachers and people who have passed through there have been like wizards of like trying to construct new narratives and these little islands of sanity, as Charles Eisenstein calls it, within like, you know, a larger kind of culture that for many of us seems quite insane. But then, so I just wanted to mention that as kind of where we met. And I've been reframing, kind of realizing that a lot of this work of telling new stories is basically narrative work. But then there's like this kind of added sphere of the narrative, this field of narratives, which really feels like it's kind of becoming a zeitgeist at the moment. And I would say the invention of the internet, and that was only in 1990 that the internet actually like kicked off. Like, that's crazy, you know. Like, I just like to usually mention that at some point whenever I talk, because basically since the internet, the way narratives and the way humanity as a global species kind of understands itself has completely changed. Because suddenly, like in the past, there was no way of getting information out to all parts of the world, and now, you know, we've got these tools and algorithms and ways of disseminating media and information in very sophisticated ways that was completely impossible before the internet existed, obviously. But and it's been kind of accelerating this kind of narrative media space, which is you know, before that, the way you'd find things out would be highly contextual and local. So like if, and maybe there'd be a local newspaper, maybe you'd hear from people who live in the place where you live, but you wouldn't be hearing, there wouldn't be like constructed information that is being constructed to make you believe a certain thing from this top down, in this top down way. So I just thought that was something to bring in, that something I'm very interested in is how do we like rewild and relocalize and bottom up narrative, like how do we do bottom up storytelling and narratives and kind of relocalize how people make sense of the world, because currently it is, I don't know if you're allowed to swear on this show. Yeah, okay, so it's currently, like, I would say it's a shit show. It's a complete shit show, like what is going on. And people, yeah, and we need, yeah, the focus on making sense. There's a lot of focus on sense making. That's, I would say that's because we're in the jungle of information and trustworthy sources and manipulation and like actual hijacking of our neurological systems. It's actually very biological what is happening with these algorithms and these pieces of news that trigger us into fear states and confusion. Anyway, I said at the beginning that I can talk for England on topics that I find interesting. So Felipe, I will move on from what the fuck is going on. We'll come back to this, I'm sure. So this is the video you
yeah. So click in the slide, and then we'll take you to the link.
This one.
Yeah.
Can you hear this?
Yes, I guess I wanted to share that video because I found it last night. I was reading, there was someone talking about experts on narratives, and he was saying what's happening right now with Black Lives Matters, and in a way what happened last week with the Trump rally is in a way is teaching me more than that about how narratives work in practice than whatever 10 years of my work as a researcher. And in a way, what I think what I'm trying, the point I'm trying to make here is the sense that we have, as Phoebe was saying, so much automation, right? We have bots, we have algorithms, we have a way of analyzing and understanding any big narratives. In the case of Australia, what happened with the bushfires, or here in the UK, right, with Brexit, for instance. So there are now more and more efficacious ways to try to understand what's going on and where the energy is, and machine and using automation and machines to blast that particular strand of narrative. So we feel is very organic and is very real because it's all over the place, but actually it's just a tiny fraction within the universe of narratives. And in a way, what's happening now with Black Lives Matters, for instance, and that's why I want to show that video, is like a bunch of teenagers were able to, in a way, play the game better than the masters of the game, if you like, the Trump, the people behind the Trump campaign and all his media narratives. And I can send you that article afterwards. So I don't know, Phoebe, if you want to add anything.
No, I think I agree with everything you say. I found that video I found that an inspiring narrative in itself. Because something I've been grappling with is how annoying I find the group that calls themselves the progressive left, and how fractured it is, that there's so little narrative around who that is together and how that works together as an ecology and an ecosystem. And I just see a lot of infighting And I think that I was just sitting with that video of like, oh, I think that's like one of the first times I've ever seen like a grand narrative of like, we are in this together, not just like we activists are in this together, but also like, you know, the white people using their privilege are in this with us, as well as like the teenagers on TikTok. Like that was just quite inspiring, I think. And it's interesting too, because I think in the space of like how you construct good narratives, often it's quite formalized of like, you know, you should like, we can write articles and disseminate them using algorithms and segmentation, but actually a video like that, or what the teenagers did on TikTok, like there's so much potential for the like Cambrian explosion of ways we can knit together these meta narratives. And anyway, that was what I was left with. I wouldn't add anything to what you said about Black Lives Matter and Trump.
Good. Do we want to see the next slide?
Yeah. The forces.
Yeah, so I think this is just the same. It's a little bit of like a breakdown of what we were just kind of watching in the video, right? We have so many different narrative camps, it's fascinating because we are flooded with information from corporations and corporate media who know really well how this memetic science works, and then us as kind of like a civil society, and when we come together as well and we form collectives or organization, there is also there is also an increase, become very powerful camp, because if you look upstream, if you really question what is and we're going to do an exercise later on during the presentation about this, if you look at what is behind the corporate agenda, what is behind the government agenda, in terms of the principles, you can see that often is an agenda that is wanting to be force-fed, and as Phoebe was saying, it's like a top-down. It's not something that people really want, right? Often, so there is a dissonance. And then what's happening, for instance, with going back to the example of Black Lives Matter, is like there's a huge amount of resonance amongst people, and so that is really kind of breaking through this kind of sea of information. In the work I do, we say the humans make sense of the world through stories, and the ability to control and harness language is where the power is, right? So the ability to control, to listen, to understand, to reframe, to put this like really powerful memes, for example, with Corona. There's been so much about this fear as a kind of like as a kind of overarching kind of sentiment and feeling, right? And that in a way brought social control, so people are staying in their houses and kind of lockdown can be implemented, which is good. But the way that the story was told was in such a way that we were able to be mobilized as a global society very quickly. Just to add a little bit.
I mean, the crew have seen this before. It's just a bit of a reminder, like, do not try and read it. We can share the link later because there's about another 6 columns off to the right. This is, I mean, if you want to, this isn't comprehensive either, but to Phoebe's point, if you look in the sort of the top half, there's some of the different mimetic tribes that you're getting in the left. and then each of them have their own different sacred values. They have their triggers. They have their kind of their triggers for sort of kicking you out. So their in-group, out-group dynamics. So there is this kind of like polarization, this sort of multi-polarization that's going on, not only on the left, but also on the right. But then, just to your point previously, Felipe, when you just got, each one of these has their own narratives, and they're running in their own reality tunnels, they're running in their own filter bubbles. And if you exist in, and each of them almost encourage you, except for some of these centrist ones, each of them kind of encourage you to exist in that filter bubble. And if you bring anything from outside of that, you get booted out. So this is just a visual reminder of just, I suppose, the tip of the iceberg of some of the polarization of narratives, the different narratives that we're experiencing.
I would just add to this that, again, I've, especially in the last few months, I've been doing a piece of work around convening people in the strategic communications space and bringing, trying to understand, like I sometimes feel as if I'm brought into spaces where I have zero context to start with, so that I can like be a bit like an ethnographer that's like trying to understand like what has happened in this space and why is it the way it is, like what is going on. So I've been I'm not going to pretend that I'm like a long time expert on like political communications, but it's been like a very interesting few months, like getting to the bottom of, I don't self-identify as left or right, which gives me this ability to not be triggered really by either. So it's like actually being curious, I think, is very important, like when investigating these different tribes. And what I've seen is on the groups that self-identify as like the progressive left, a lot of the narrative is very based on ideology. It's very based on like people's like very smart thinking. It's quite complex. It's to do with what people believe to be correct and right, and it's quite in the head. So I've noticed it's very cerebral, and on the right there's a lot more, I would say, narrative on the level of emotion, on the level of like just like feeling of what is right and wrong. And I'd say on the level of feeling, it's much easier for different groups to band together. It's a stronger like interoperability when it's like it doesn't really matter like the exact detail of what we are saying on the surface or the ideology, but there's like this strong sense of like, we don't like them and we like them, or like this, it's a different level. It's a kind of, it's in the dark matter, I would call it, like of human beings. It's not in this like more superficial, like visible layer. Whereas on the left, there's it's interesting, a lot more of it is on this superficial layer, and there's a lot more infighting, because it's like, your detail about this is not the same as my detail about this, and so we're going to argue for like hours, and it's just so that's just something I've noticed, especially because a lot of the left is questioning like, how do we band together as a movement, and why are we always fighting? It's like, so that's been an interesting question, how to unite. So that's why that video you played as well, Felipe, just feels like very on the money for me right now. Go to the next slide. Do you have anything to add to that, Felipe?
No, just the sense that in a way the right has been so successful is because they're very good at this. And then meanwhile the left is like whatever, trying, so it's almost like the media landscape, the Twitter sphere is the next frontier in terms of like places to reclaim and places to, in a way, have inform and useful conversation, and I think now the left is starting to understand, in a way, the power of narratives to change culture.
And one other thing that came to mind is I've heard on the left it being said by a really brilliant colleague of mine, actually. She said plurality is the kryptonite of the left. And I've been thinking about that. And I actually wonder if like deep empathy is the kryptonite of the left. Because if we want to exist as a plural movement, with many different, like with a real diversity of views and opinions, then we need to develop a very deep empathy to not get into that infighting. We need to go deeper. That kind of informs some of the work I'm doing that I'll talk about later.
Yeah, so this is again, this is from Daniel Schmachtenberger, and yeah, I think it's exactly what Phoebe was referring to. That in a way, we are very invested in our own views, and we believe wholeheartedly that we are right, and then I think more and more, I think what's happening is like we are learning that we need to be able to be open and to try to just try to make sense from this kind of like different truth about the same thing. And I think part of the problem is like we get so stuck in our own camps, and I think the ability to create consensus is the ability to also being able to listen effectively and listen deeply and engage in conversation.
Yeah, I think that's right. Building on the empathy, like deep empathy, curiosity, and conversation. I couldn't tell you the number of times I'm with somebody who I really deeply respect and like, and love the work of, and they start talking about them and like the right wing, they do this and like they've done it again. And I just feel like if we were truly living the values that we talk about on the left, we've just got to go beyond. It's like, it's really like, we don't have time for that stuff. That's kind of how I feel. It's like, we do not have time to get into some petty, like polarized war, because like that is exactly what is being weaponized against us. Like this is all of this polarization, division, like that's a very age-old technique of control and distraction. So I think we basically need to like completely bin the idea of left and right anyway, and find like a deeper empathy and a deeper something. My friend Nora, Nora's been mentioned actually, she's got this really amazing story that she told at one of our narratives sessions by her dad about a dolphin that was being trained to do tricks. And the researchers of this dolphin laboratory, I hope I remember the punchline of this. That's an interesting metaphor in itself. I'm becoming really conscious of the metaphors I use, like punchline. Like what the hell? What is that? I'm just like, I've noticed a lot of the war metaphors that we all use all the time, and I'll talk about not using war metaphors, and then we'll slip into saying like, yeah, we really need to mobilize against that. I'm like, oh God, it's happening again. But yeah, the punch. So just thinking about that story, says this dolphin and the researchers decide that they're going to try and train the dolphin to do something the dolphin has never done before. And so they're giving the dolphin fish, usually for doing a trick, like, jumping in the air 3 times. Okay, you can have a fish. It's a one kind of like reward incentivization scheme. But then they need to try and train the dolphin to do something it's never done before. And that's a completely different thing. So it's like the dolphin is doing these tricks and they're not giving the dolphin any fish, and the dolphin's getting really frustrated and upset. And like it's risky for the trainers because they've built this trust. And they come back like day after day, and after a few days, the dolphin suddenly gets it and does something that it has never done before. And I kind of feel as if we who are doing this work are in that state of the dolphin. We're in the left and right. We've done this thing many times. We've got all this incentivization to do that, but we actually need to do something that we don't even realize is so different to the thing we've been doing. And we're in that learning place, I think. But it's like, we don't even know what that thing is. We don't even know that we need to do a thing that we've never done before. So anyway, yeah, learning. Sense making. I guess this is one. Did you want to say anything about this, Felipe? I'm happy for you to.
No, no, just the sense of like, for me and the work we do this, the kind of also like in terms of sense making is always about listening and like Phoebe was saying, and I have a different perspective in the sense of like, I think you have your own kind of narratives and you have your own kind of political views, and I think that is fine. But I think is in order to make sense of a conversation, yeah, it's really important, as Phoebe was saying, to really listen very deeply to both sides of the conversation, or to all sides of the conversation, and then in a way suspend your judgment in order to make sense of the conversation objectively.
Yeah, I'm just aware of the time. I'm just seeing the time, so I'm happy to move quickly through this, and I'd be happy to pick up this, more about this article.
I think it'd be good to move into that. I think we're planning to sort of do a bit of a workshop session around the iceberg, Felipe, at another time. So I'd be sort of, I suppose, really interested in the work that you've been doing, Phoebe, around this, just quickly before we sort of put it out to, and we'll have some questions. I know I've certainly got some burning questions, and there's been some really interesting commentary in the chat. So in terms of this, you mentioned, I really loved you sort of saying that we don't know what we're learning yet. I've heard Benita Roy talk about it in the way that we learn a language, both as develop language as a culture or learn language as a child. We don't really know how we're doing it while we're doing it. And then if we look back, we can't actually work out quite how we did it, but we're doing it in the moment. And you just, even sort of what Felipe was saying earlier, how so much of what he's learned in the last kind of 6 months, just kind of dwarfs what he's learned researching for years. And I really sense we're in this moment where we're in the fist of history. We're in some kind of, I don't know, will this be called the Great Awakening? Will it be called, I don't know, something naff like Renaissance 2.0? Or, but in this, I'm really interested in your background is super interesting as a scientist, and how you've landed in this space, and what somebody like you is doing in terms of the projects to, with some of the great minds that you've been working with, what is happening out there in terms of this moment and the project that you're working on. I think we can stop the screen share now as well and see everyone's faces.
Yeah, well, just basically your question, totally, I can answer it with the slides that I whacked in here this morning. Cool. Although there is this slide, which I don't know.
That's Tyson. We'll get into that a bit later. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't actually ever set eyes on Tyson in Porter, but I'm a really big fan of his work and have quoted him many times. So I'm thinking about your question. Don't want to get too distracted by slides. I put this up here exactly because I come from a science background, molecular biology and like systems, genetic networks. And a lot of my journey has been, I'm a patterns person. So I'm interested in how to apply these patterns into different contexts. So a lot of my work has been moving from science into like the social sphere. So governance, or how you organize people, how you facilitate teams. And now it's really exciting to be realizing that this can also be, this realm of complexity and systems can be applied to this sphere of language and metaphor and narrative, and you know, a lot of the principles of complexity, like one, observing the observer, is a big one that I learned from Nora Bates and Gregory Bates. And it's like you should always, we need to observe the observer, also who is telling the narrative. Like, it's not enough to do really good sense making around whatever piece of information you get. We need to be going upstream and observing who has given that piece of information. So there's a lot of like really interesting like like second order cybernetics of like how to make sense of the world. That's what this article was about. It was about trying to give it's part of a larger project of building kind of sense making curriculum, like how to do good sense making. And this is like a very fast, like a cheat sheet of like, you know, just reading this, I was hoping could give people more of like an internal space, because I think it's all about these internal structures that we have, that when you receive information, if you're just receiving it like completely unfiltered, it's just going to go in and you're just going to be manipulable and believe what you hear. But with this, what I want to create is internal filters and space. And, you know, people who have meditated for many, many years also create this internal space and filters. It's like, you know, when you're watching your own thoughts and you start to notice that when something happens in the outside world, instead of just getting triggered and upset, it happens, you notice your response, you watch your response, you know, you've got more space to actually be alive and responsive and kind of a vital system in the world. So there's quite interesting connections between also like Buddhism and meditation and spiritual practice, and then this more like scientific approach. And then I bring in the art, because I actually think that the best narratives, I said this to Felipe last night, the best narrative work comes from intuition and soul. Like, so, you know, when there's Felipe called it plastic, like this kind of plastic narratives of like, if you're in the boardrooms kind of strategizing the best story and narrative, and you're trying to like from your head, you know, on a whiteboard, like plan out, okay, well, because this happened in 2012, we're going to use this cultural reference, and then we're going to connect it to this, you know, value. We've mapped all the values of the humans, you know, the human system. And then, you know, like there's a lot of ways you can kind of construct things in a very cerebral way. But actually, as Felipe said, like the stories and the narratives that just take off like wildfire are usually not over-constructed. And there's something about that. I was talking to a viral video producer who I've been working with in some of this, and he was saying that, you know, he's hired to create these viral videos that get kind of like 3 or 4 million views, and often his clients, like big companies previously, now he's interested now in doing more progressive like activism work, but his clients would always say like, well, what's your methodology? Like, show us your exact methodology, how you do that. And he was just like, well, like I could, but like, if I'm honest, it's usually through immersing in a space and thinking about all my memories of like being a kid, and like that film I watched and that article I wrote, and it kind of swirls all around, and suddenly he'll like get, you know, it's almost like he kind of unfocuses, and the answer kind of like, he gets his ideas like that. And I think that's a very artistic process, and it also talks to the warm data process, because warm data is what Nora Bateson calls it, you know, the material of complexity. And that's actually how we operate as humans, and that's the deep stuff. And if you can, and that's where, like, you know, narratives like Extinction Rebellion creates, or Black Lives Matter, and it's like, it gets you it speaks to your heart, because it hasn't been constructed in people's heads in a boardroom. It's come from real raw experience, emotion, memory, injustice, collaboration, like diversity, and yeah, I don't want to keep talking. I'm sad we don't have longer, because yeah, this is such a great topic and a really great conversation. This was just an example of some mapping I did recently. I've been convening this group, as I said, strategic communications experts. It's called Narwhal. So that's a little bit of culture jamming as well. I like to try and be playing with the narrative of the narrative as well. It's like a narwhal is a creature that is both mythical. It's a real creature. It's an underwater creature, but people aren't sure if it's real or not. And anyway, so that's a little bit of background on the name. This was the session we hosted with Nora, and also with Alina Siegfried, who's an amazing spoken word artist from New Zealand, on detonating narratives. That's why she told the story of the dolphin. I can send you the link so you could watch that. And then finally, this other project, Moral Imaginations, is the kind of lab that I am working in to pilot and prototype these practices and methodologies that expand perception beyond like human species, beyond normal periods of time, thinking about how do we tell stories from the perspective of a non-human being, how do we get advice from future unborn generations. And I believe that all of us have that capability and capacity to be so creative that we can actually think in terms of perspectives that we've never even experienced before. And so I've been piloting this with a group of 160 people over the last 3 months. We had like 6 fortnightly sessions, and people ended up creating all sorts of artwork. It's been amazing. And I think that this is just one example. This, I'm not saying Moral Imaginations is like the way to do narratives. I want to see like hundreds, thousands of creative methodologies, practices, communities that can bring people into that place of raw creativity and power to tell stories in a different way. It just happens that I'm quite preoccupied with how to bring imagination and being moral together. So I think there's something really interesting there, because we're going to have to develop like completely new morality if we're not going to kill the planet. And this is just a screenshot of our session where everybody was speaking on behalf of a non-human being, and it was really fun because people changed their Zoom names to their being. So we had the night sky, they them was speaking on behalf of the night sky, and like this Google Doc, people were like signing this letter. It's been really fun. So I'd love to invite you all to come and play in that space sometime. I'm not going to talk about this. This was a session that we ran recently, but yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. That was amazing. And like you said, yeah, we could talk about this forever. And we've got a little over sort of 5 minutes left. We like to respect time and finish on time, but I think we also like to stick around for 15 minutes and sort of talk about things further. If Felipe and Phoebe, you can, because we'd like to. It'd be great to put it out to the crew, out to the floor, and see if anyone's got any questions about what's been discussed.
Would you like some help with that, Matt? Were you across the chat, or I can?
Yeah, I was a little bit. There was a lot of what Kayla was saying, along with what Josh mentioned. How do we sort of broach these kind of mimetic boundaries and pull? How do we get to that video? Where everyone sort of pulls in together. But Josh or Kayla, if you've got something specific around that, then that you'd like to ask, then just unmute yourself.
Kayla, I love the point you made about feelings. I'm really in the business of feelings. I think I'd love to hear more about what you were thinking there.
I was actually mostly just responding to Jess's question in that one. She asked, she said the left of progressives are behind on using feelings because they're not 100% sure of whether it's ethical. And I was just saying, I think I recognize that in the left, and I was just suggesting reasons why that could be, because the feelings that the left use are more like considered like bleeding heart liberal, or like too emotional, and like not being drawn back into rationality or something. And a lot of people just attack the emotion instead of attacking the argument, and then the left get distracted on defending the emotion of the argument. So I feel like a lot of them are just, like me included, are just using argument and detaching from emotion to avoid being attacked for no reason, especially on the internet, where you don't know who you're talking to. But that was just what I was suggesting in response to Jess.
I think there was also the sense that, like, going back to the question of how ethical it is to manipulate people's brains and people's emotions, it's not. It's definitely not ethical.
I was gonna, yeah.
But it's happening anyway. So it's like, so the game is on, and when we look at future dystopia, right? So at the moment, the current, in a way, the current narrative is saying we are, there isn't really a vision for the future, and I think therefore it's so important that we reclaim our imagination and we reclaim ways of crafting and creating and seeding and listening different narrative for the future, for what's happening right now. And I think it goes back to the question, I think, or I will go and take this question to the point of like knowledge creation and the way of how currently the dominating mainstream monolithic narratives are white, male, Western, capitalistic in a general way. And so the voices of the animals, the voices of indigenous people, the voices of women, the voices of kids, the voices of so many different voices are not being heard at the moment. They are not a part of the voices of me, who is feeling like overwhelmed and all over the place, is not a valid voice, is not heard. And so right, so in a way I feel like what we do in this, and why the fascination with narratives is not to equally manipulate people and their brains and their hearts with narratives that are sexy and compelling. We say a sexy fish, a viral meme, we call it a sexy fish, right? So like, it is a technical language for that, right? And I think what happened with, for instance, with the, going back to a real example, Black Lives Matters, is people are tapping into some sort of narrative and some sort of like idea that a lot of people are resonating with, and then suddenly start to catch momentum, and then it's not big influencers and big names who have like massive kind of following can disseminate a message very far and wide, but as Phoebe was saying with her friend who does videos, the ability to really crack the code is something that we cannot outsource from the machines. And yeah, like the question, Angie's question about how data fits in is kind of like part of the broader the broad listening process, where we can see scientifically what is happening. We can see who is saying what. We can see how much power, how much traffic, how much energy is behind. So when, for instance, when you see like Trump's Twitter activity compared to, for instance, the Black Lives Matters, for instance, or Boris Johnson talking about coronavirus, and in a way the other conversation, you see that, and it's a great question. You can see when you look at the data that what it seems so real and so solid to us, the sense that this is the truth and this is what's happening. It's not. It's not. You look underneath the carpet and there's so much more going on, and it's encouraging because it's in a way the emergence of a new truth, or a new way of knowing, a new renaissance, however we're going to call it, where there is synergy between different camps, between left and right, knowing that we have a civilizational crisis to deal with, and there's no time to waste in like us hiding in our own little camps.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Felipe, you're absolutely right with this. Yeah, the white male voice, and you know, there's a hierarchy after that of if you're, you know, a white woman, if you're, you know, many things like, and it seems like there's a kind of hierarchy of that, but it also means that people who are not fitting that description can say things for hundreds of years, and suddenly a white man says it in 2020, and it's like this new knowledge, and it's like this is like really a difficult, this is something that really needs some culture jamming, because you know, this sense of like this new idea of, you know, imagination this, or this new idea of narrative this, and it's like this stuff has been talked about by people, like, yeah, it's very frustrating, and it's especially frustrating when it's in the field of narratives, when people are talking about the need to change narratives, but actually themselves are not jamming the kind of hierarchical hegemonic narrative structure. Yeah, I think it's ancient, and it's, yeah, exactly, and just ancient. And I think also we need to be careful when we say like a new renaissance, or, you know, this new thing that we're in right now. I think we've been in this in different forms for hundreds of years. This is not new. The technology is new, and the, you know, the way it looks in the specifics is new, but there's always been, you know, there have always been uprisings and movements, and we've been moving, yeah, in a direction. I don't know what you would say about that, Felipe. I have a sense, I feel as if I went through a big reframe in the last few years, where I stopped feeling like we're in this like exciting new moment, because I felt as if it was going to burn me out, because actually like it just never arrived. Like I was kind of like, oh, it's now, and it's now, and it's now, and it's now, and then I was just like, screw that, like it's just continual, and we're on this like long journey, and it might take another 50 years. We may not have 50 years, but, you know, we don't know how long it'll go on for. I think there's something quite humbling in kind of climbing down from the narrative that like this is the moment, and like everything is now changing, and like we are the heroes of this story. It's like, I just think we're more people after many other people who are trying to live out our values and our vision of what is a beautiful and just world.
And I think it's also like, and I add maybe the question of like the collective versus the personal voice. Like one of the ways that the system perpetuates itself, the current system, is by really atomizing our voices and saying like, we are all so different, and we are all so, in a way, in opposition to each other. And in a way, talking about like ancient conversations and ancient voices, there's a sense of like, yeah, I have my own voice, but I am in alignment. I am part of this whole. Australia as a whole, the UK as a whole. There is a sense of a common good. There is a sense of
bigger.
And I think Tyson Yunkaporta talks beautifully to that in his book, in relationship with the being able to listen more. And I think a part of the shift, I think, in terms of like how we can cultivate this space for a flourishing imagination, how can we visualize and articulate different futures, how we can create compelling narratives that can attract so many people and connect so many people. I think it's a lot about kind of speaking. It's about speaking less and listening more, really, and it's about really like letting that voice come through of like the marginalized voices, the unheard voices.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful sentiment to finish on from both of you, sentiments from both of you. There are so many things that was discussed here that I'd love to double click on and do another hour on. So maybe we can do this again sometime.
I'd love to.
Yeah, so would we. But thank you, Felipe and Phoebe. This has been really, really enriching and insightful.